The Council of 12 Galaxies had never been wrong. Not once in 47 million years of recorded history. So when they declared humanity's extinction date, they did so with the casual confidence of accountants filing paperwork. 6 months. That's all the primitive bipeds on the third rock from Sol got. I was there, standing in the Grand Assembly Hall on Velcor Prime when Ambassador Thrix delivered the news with all the emotion of someone reading a grocery list. My name is Krell, and I'm what you might call a xenobiologist. Though that title doesn't quite capture the existential dread that comes with studying species on the brink of oblivion. The humans will face complete annihilation in precisely 183 of their Earth days, Thrix announced, his 17 eyes blinking in sequential waves. The Vornak Swarm has already consumed 6 star systems in the Orion Arm. Mathematical projections confirm Earth's position directly in their path. No one gasped. No one objected. The Vornak were older than most civilizations. A hive mind of biomechanical nightmares that ate planets for breakfast and picked their teeth with moons. They'd been pruning the galaxy of inconvenient life forms since before my species learned to make fire. Evacuation? Someone asked from the back. I think it was Ambassador Zinn from the Crystalline. Wait. No, from the Diamond Collective. Thrix's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. For 78 billion primitives who haven't even mastered faster than light travel, the logistics alone would take decades. Besides, Council regulations are clear. Species below Class 5 technological advancement aren't eligible for intervention protocols. And that was that. Humanity got filed under acceptable losses and we all went to lunch. Except I couldn't eat. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. Like a mathematical equation that balanced perfectly but still somehow gave you the wrong answer. I'd spent 3 years studying humans. Mostly because they were weird and I needed material for my dissertation. They did things no rational species would do, like jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft for fun, or eating capsaicin compounds that literally triggered their pain receptors because it tasted good. They were fascinating idiots basically. So instead of heading to the dining complex, I went back to my quarters and pulled up every file I had on Earth. News feeds, cultural databases, intercepted communications. The humans knew the Vornak were coming. Of course they knew. Every species with a basic radio telescope could see that particular apocalypse rolling toward them like a cosmic steamroller. And how were they reacting? By throwing parties apparently. I watched a broadcast from something called Times Square in New York City. Millions of humans packed together. Many intoxicated, counting down to a new year they statistically wouldn't survive to see the end of. They were laughing, kissing, setting off explosive devices purely for the aesthetic appeal of colored lights. You're all going to die, I muttered at the screen, and you're wasting time on fireworks. My research assistant Venna poked her sensor stalks through my door. Still obsessing over the humans? They don't make sense. They're pre-FTL. Nothing they do makes sense. She floated closer, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to concerned yellow. Kel, you need to let this go. The council made their decision. The humans are a statistical footnote, but I couldn't let it go. Over the next month I became the station's resident human expert, much to everyone's amusement. I tracked their response to the impending doom. It was bizarre, chaotic, and absolutely riveting. Some humans did panic, sure, but others? Others started building. Not evacuation ships. They didn't have the technology. They built monuments, time capsules, launched satellites with messages for whoever might find Earth after they were gone. One group of scientists started a project to encode human DNA and culture into crystalline, into glass matrices that could survive the Vornak feeding process. They're preserving themselves for a future they won't see, I told the weekly xenobiology symposium. It's simultaneously the most logical and most absurd thing I've ever witnessed. Professor Kalm, a distinguished scholar from Andromeda Sector 7, yawned through 3 of his 4 mouths. Denial is common among doomed species. They'll accept reality when the Vornak arrive. 5 months passed. The Vornak consumed 2 more systems, each one bringing them closer to Sol. The Council sent exactly 1 message to Earth, a formal expression of regret for the inconvenience of their extinction, along with a certificate acknowledging their contribution to galactic biodiversity. I'm not joking. There was an actual certificate. The humans framed it and hung it in their United Nations building. Then, with 37 days left, something changed. The human communications traffic I'd been monitoring suddenly shifted. Less panic, less chaos. Instead, there was this strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Their leaders gave speeches about dignity and defiance. Their artists created works of devastating beauty. Their scientists published their final theories, not for peer review but for the cosmic record, and their military, which everyone agreed was adorably primitive with their chemical rockets and nuclear weapons, started doing something interesting. They stopped preparing to defend Earth. Instead, they launched every available vessel into a loose formation between their planet and the approaching Vornak fleet. Not to fight. The math made that impossible. No, they were creating a sensor network, a web of observation satellites and crewed ships that would document the Vornak's approach in unprecedented detail. They're going to die gathering data for science, I said, stunned. They won't even be around to analyze it. And they're still doing science. Benna thought I'd gone mad. Maybe I had. But I convinced her to help me do something probably illegal. We tapped into the sensor feeds from those human vessels and started recording everything. If humanity was going to leave a legacy, someone should witness. 20 days until extinction. 15. 10. The Vornak Swarm entered the Sol system. 300,000 bioships, each the size of a small moon, moving with perfect coordination. I watched the human vessels scatter their sensors, maintaining their observation posts, even as the Vornak vanguard approached. 5 days. 3. 1. The council held a memorial service. A brief moment of silence for humanity's passing. Very dignified. Very fine. Except humanity didn't pass. The first Vornak bioship that tried to enter Earth's orbit just stopped. Dead in space, all systems dark. Then the second. Then 10 more. Then 100. The entire vanguard fleet went silent in the span of 6 hours, drifting like cosmic garbage while the rest of the swarm pulled back in what looked like genuine confusion. The council emergency session was chaos itself. Thrix couldn't stop his eyes from blinking out of sequence, a sign of severe distress in his species. This is impossible. The Vornak don't stop. They don't retreat. They don't fail. But they had failed. Against humans. Against a species we'd written off as primitive. I was still watching my illegal feeds when the message came through. It was audio only, transmitted on every frequency simultaneously, delivered in flawless galactic standard. The voice was young, female, and carried an edge of something I'd never heard before. Not quite amusement. Not quite anger. Something in between. Hello, Council of 12 Galaxies. My name is Mira Voss, and I'm speaking to you from the Sol Defense Initiative headquarters. I understand you gave us 6 months to live. Generous of you, really. The flowers you sent were lovely. Sarcasm. She was using sarcasm while sitting on a planet that should have been consumed an hour ago. You might be wondering what happened to your unstoppable Vornak friends. Well, funny story. Turns out, when you spend 10,000 years surviving ice ages, plagues, world wars, asteroid impacts, and each other, you develop a certain knack for not dying. We're stubborn like that. I leaned closer to my screen, my 3 hearts hammering in asynchronous rhythm. Your Vornak Swarm operates on a hive mind frequency, doesn't it? Beautiful system. Very efficient. We noticed that about 8,000 years ago when they last came through this sector. Oh, did we forget to mention that? Yeah, they tried to eat us before we were still hitting rocks together to make fire, but we remembered. Humans are excellent at holding grudges. The chamber had gone completely silent. Every delegate was accessing their own feeds now, trying to verify what they were hearing. Mira continued, her voice taking on a cheerful quality that somehow made the words more terrifying. So we spent a few millennia figuring out how hive minds work. Trial and error, mostly. Lost a few colonies on Mars and Europa during testing. But that's the cost of science, right? Anyway, we developed a harmonic disruptor. Sends out a signal that makes hive mind frequencies collapse into recursive loops. The Vornak are basically arguing with themselves right now about whether they exist. Philosophical crisis at a quantum level. It's actually pretty fascinating from a neurological standpoint. Professor Kale made a choking sound. His species didn't have vocal cords, so that took effort. Now, here's the thing, Mira said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We could have told you about this. We could have asked for help, shown you our research, maybe gotten that Class 5 rating you're so precious about. But you know what you did instead. You sent us a certificate, a goddamn certificate like we were a kindergarten class that tried really hard at the science fair.
Oh no! Oh no!
She was angry. An angry human was somehow more terrifying than the Vornak. So here's humanity's official response to the Council of 12 Galaxies. We're still here. We've been here for 10,000 years. We'll be here for 10,000 more. You want to classify us? Fine. We're class whatever we want to be, and we're not asking for permission anymore. We saved ourselves. We'll save ourselves again if we have to. And if the galaxy needs saving from the next cosmic horror, maybe don't count us out just because we're young. The transmission ended. Just like that. No goodbye. No diplomatic pleasantries. Just the cosmic equivalent of a door slamming in our faces. The Grand Assembly Hall erupted into arguments that would last weeks. Some delegates demanded sanctions. Others wanted immediate contact. A few suggested pretending the whole thing never happened. I sat in my quarters, rewatching the feeds from Earth's defense network, studying the signal patterns that had neutralized the Vornak. It was elegant, brutal, and absolutely brilliant. The kind of solution only a species that routinely fought extinction and won would develop. Vanna found me 12 hours later, still analyzing data. They're going to send a delegation to Earth. The Council wants answers. The Council wants to know if humans are dangerous, I corrected. And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. But not in the way they think. What way then? I pulled up an image of Mira Voss from the human databases. She was 23 years old, had 3 doctorate degrees, and in her official ID photo, she was smiling like someone who just pulled off the greatest prank in galactic history. Humans are dangerous because they don't know when to quit, I said. You tell them they have 6 months to live, and they spend it figuring out how to live 6,000 years more. You throw the unkillable at them, and they kill it anyway. They're not powerful because of their technology or their numbers. They're powerful because they're too stubborn to accept that anything is impossible. That sounds like a problem. Or an opportunity. I started drafting my report, already knowing it would change everything. The Council classified humanity wrong. They're not a Class 5 technological civilization. They're a Class 1 survival civilization. The oldest, meanest, most persistent survivors in the galaxy, and we just made ourselves look like the idiots who wrote them off. Vanna's patterns shifted to thoughtful blue. What do you think will happen now? I thought about Mira Voss, about her sarcasm and her smile and her casual mention of 10,000 years of survival. I thought about a species that threw parties while staring down extinction and built monuments to futures they might never see. I said slowly, the galaxy is about to get very interesting. The Council delegation arrived at Earth exactly 47 days after what humans were now calling the Vornak incident. I say calling, but that implies some level of seriousness. The humans had turned it into merchandise. T-shirts reading "I survived my extinction date" were apparently selling quite well. I was part of that delegation naturally, as the station's resident human expert, which was a title I'd somehow earned by being the only one who bothered to actually study them. I got drafted into what was definitely going to be the most awkward first contact in galactic history. Ambassador Thrix led our group, all 17 eyes twitching nervously as our ship approached Earth's orbital defense network. And yes, they had an orbital defense network now, 36 platforms bristling with weapons that definitely hadn't existed 6 months ago, all of them tracking our vessel with uncomfortable precision. They built those in 6 weeks, Vanna whispered, her patterns flickering anxious purple. How did they build those in 6 weeks? Spite, I muttered. Pure concentrated spite and coffee, probably. The humans guided us to a landing site in Geneva, Switzerland. The United Nations had apparently decided this was important enough to dust off their primary assembly hall, the one usually reserved for arguing about things they'd never agree on. I'd done my homework on human politics. It was like watching 1,000 different species try to cooperate, except they were all the same species and somehow that made it worse. We were met on the landing pad by a reception committee of 12 humans, mirroring our own delegation numbers. Subtle. The humans enjoyed their symbolism, and there, standing in the center, was Mira Voss. She looked exactly like her photos, except somehow more intimidating in person. She wore a simple black suit, had her dark hair pulled back efficiently, and watched our approach with eyes that had probably calculated 17 different ways to neutralize us before we'd even opened the airlock. She was also eating an apple. Just casually eating an apple while waiting for the most significant diplomatic encounter in human history. Ambassador Thrix, she said, nodding politely as we descended the ramp. Welcome to Earth. Thank you for not sending another certificate. My office was running out of wall space. I couldn't help it. I made the clicking sound my species uses for surprised laughter. Mira's eyes flicked to me, one eyebrow raised in what might have been approval. Thrix managed to get all 17 eyes under control. Representative Voss, on behalf of the Council of 12 Galaxies, we come seeking dialogue regarding recent events. You mean the part where we didn't die on schedule? Mira took another bite of her apple. Yeah, that must have messed up your paperwork something fierce. Come on, we've got a conference room set up. Fair warning, It's going to take about 6 hours of discussion to get anywhere productive, and humans get cranky when we're hungry. We've arranged lunch." She turned and walked toward the building without waiting to see if we'd follow. The other humans in her delegation smiled with varying degrees of politeness and gestured for us to proceed. "I like her already," I told Venna. "You would," she replied, but followed me anyway. The conference room was designed for human comfort, which meant it was slightly too warm and the chairs were wildly inappropriate for most of our physiologies. The humans had tried, bless them. There were cushions and adjustable seats and what looked like a heating pad for Ambassador Threx, who was cold-blooded. But what caught my attention was the wall display. It showed Earth from orbit, beautiful and blue and completely uneaten by cosmic horrors. Underneath, in multiple languages including Galactic Standard, was a simple caption, "Still here." Mira sat at the head of the table, her apple core deposited in a recycling bin with practiced accuracy. "So, let's address the obvious question first. How did a primitive pre-FTL species defeat the Vornak Swarm when civilizations a million years older failed?" Thrix's mandibles clicked uncomfortably. "That was going to be our question." "I know, but see, I've studied your council records. Took some hacking, won't apologize for it. You've encountered the Vornak 47 times in recorded history. You've never beaten them. You just evacuate whatever systems are in their path and file reports about acceptable losses." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "So I'm curious why you never tried what we tried." "Which was?" This came from Delegate Morix, a scholar from the Spiral Collective. Mira smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We asked them nicely to stop. The silence that followed was profound. Then she laughed, actually laughed, and pulled up a holographic display. Okay. But seriously, the answer is embarrassingly simple. We studied the problem. The Vornak are a hive mind operating on quantum-entangled communication frequencies. Their individual units have no autonomy, no decision-making capability. They're drones following orders from a central consciousness. "This is known," Thrix said. "Right, but here's what apparently wasn't known. Hive minds have a fatal flaw. They're phenomenally efficient but catastrophically fragile. Disrupt a signal and the whole thing collapses. It's like a house of cards. Beautiful structure until someone sneezes." She manipulated the hologram, showing wave patterns and frequency disruptions. "We developed a harmonic resonance weapon that creates feedback loops in quantum-entangled systems. The Vornak's communication network ate itself from the inside out." Professor Kelm, who'd insisted on joining the delegation despite my advice, spoke up. "Impossible. Our best scientists studied hive mind vulnerabilities for millennia." "Did they, though?" Mira pulled up another file. "Because I've read your research papers. Very thorough. Very theoretical. Lots of elegant mathematics. But I notice you never actually tested anything on real hive minds. Too dangerous, too unethical, too much risk of making them angry." "Obviously," Morix said. "Right. Obviously. Can't have ethics violations." Mira's voice dripped with that sarcasm again. "Except humans don't have that problem because we've been violating ethics since we figured out what ethics were. We test things. We break things. We lose colonies and cities and sometimes entire continents figuring out how the universe works. It's not pretty, it's not safe, but it gets results." She stood up, pacing now. "I'd learned this was a human thinking behavior. 8,000 years ago the Vornak came through Sol's system, wiped out our settlements on Mars, our mining operations in the asteroid belt. Earth survived because we were too primitive to be worth the effort, but some humans remembered. We passed down stories, warnings, and when we got smart enough we started preparing. For 8,000 years? I couldn't help asking. Mira turned to me, and I saw something ancient in her eyes despite her youth. Humans have long memories for things that try to kill us. We've been tracking the Vornak's pattern, predicting their route. We knew they'd come back eventually, so every generation did their part, built on what came before. Lost people in experiments failed hundreds of times, kept trying anyway." She pulled up images. Research stations destroyed in testing accidents. Colony ships that vanished. Monuments to scientists who died pushing the boundaries of what was possible. This wasn't genius. This was stubbornness weaponized across millennia. "We're really good at holding grudges and really bad at accepting defeat." Thrix was taking notes now, his appendages moving frantically across a datapad. "You dedicated 8,000 years to defeating a threat that might never return. Well, we also did other stuff. Invented agriculture, built civilizations, had a bunch of wars, created art, wrote philosophy, developed ice cream. Multitasking is another human specialty. Mira sat back down. But yeah, we kept the Vornak project running in the background. Various governments, universities, independent researchers. Sometimes we forgot about it for a century or two, then someone would rediscover the old files and pick up where we left off. That kind of institutional continuity is remarkable, I said. Most species can barely maintain projects across a single generation. Most species don't face extinction every few thousand years, Mira replied. We've had ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, pandemics that killed half our population. Extinction is kind of our thing. We've gotten good at bouncing back. Then his patterns shifted to curious green. Your casualty figures from the Vornak encounter. How many did you lose? 43,000. Mostly volunteers manning the sensor network. Mira's expression hardened. We'll remember every single one of them. Already building monuments, writing their names into the historical record. That's another thing humans do.